The marvelous coincidence that the story, the bulk of it, is set exactly 100 years ago in October 1914, which when I wrote it 2 years ago, I had no idea I'd be reading it exactly 100 years later from the setting. Do we have any Manitobans or Saskatchewanians in the audience other than me? Has anyone ever heard of the town of Flin Flon? Yes, okay, so that's what this story is about. The Canadian National Railway wants to know what to call the copper town, tucked into the dogleg, on the border between Manitoba and Saskatchewan. The radio operator says they're threatening to call it Flin Flon if they don't hear any different from us. We all laugh ourselves giddy at that, all of us in the Hudson Bay Mining and Smelting Company Limited. Go ahead, we say, call it Flin Flon. Bad luck to call it anything else. It's the only name the place has had for its 15 years now. And if that's not the judgment of history in these uncertain times, I don't know what is. All of us in the mine company know the story of how Tom Crichton named the place for a character in a dime novel back in 1914. Tom himself tells it to anyone who will listen. But he never tells the story of how he found the novel in the first place, and what that book did once he started to read it. He never says where the book is now. I hope it's fallen apart, battered into mush by the rain and snow, unreadable. It was the last days of October, and too cold to be paddling north on a fool's errand. But Tom had that twinkle in his eye that men would follow anywhere if they had just a little bit of greed in them. He'd heard tell of some gold from one of his Cree pals. In those days there were claims fluttering from every tree, and we were all desperate to find something new, something first. So there we were, the four of us, in 2 canoes with little hard pinpricks of snow dusting our toques and coats. Tom never wore a toque, just the same floppy hat year-round. He never seemed to feel the cold, for all that he was thin as a boy, and his clothes flopped around him. He was made to live in the bush. If we complained about the wind and the snow, Tom would just laugh and say, "Well, but aren't you pleased the mosquitoes are gone?" Kate Rice was the same. In the life for something other than gold. Not Dick Woozy, her partner. He wanted the gold and nothing else. People said they were lovers, but I'd been in their cabin. It had a rope nailed down the precise middle. She was an educated woman, a schoolmarm before she took to prospecting for God knows what reason. Before she took up with Woozy, she'd been living alone in a tar paper shack with no company for miles, but a canary in a cage she brought all the way from Ontario. I didn't know her then, and I never saw any birdcage in her cabin with Woozy. Maybe it died. Maybe it never existed. People make up all kinds of stories about each other in the wild. We found the book at Frog Portage. There's a log cabin there with bunks. A ramshackle place that might well go back to the days of Frobisher for all I know, but I bet it's still standing. It had plenty of room for the 4 of us to spend a warm, dry night before hauling our gear over to the Churchill River. The book lay on a lower bunk, patiently waiting, with a note stuck inside the cover. "Traveler, take me and leave another." We were solitary creatures, we prospectors, but we survived by sharing what we had. If I came up snowshoeing to an old-timer's cabin in the dead of night, well, crotchety as he might be, he'd fry me a sausage. We did the same with books. Once one of us had read one, we'd pass it along. Didn't matter whether it was the Bible or Sherlock Holmes. We'd read whatever we could get our hands on. So we fell on this novel like a pack of wolves. It was green cloth, dirty and worn, with the title in gold, The Sunless City by J.E. Preston Murdoch. "Read it out loud, Tom," said Kate. She was huddled up to her neck in her patch sleeping bag, bought third hand in Winnipeg years before. She swore that bag had been to the North Pole with a member of the Peary expedition. She always kept her arms out of the bag, though, no matter how cold it got, and her rifle close to hand. I don't know whether she was protecting herself from the men in the room with her or the wolves outside, and maybe she didn't know either. Maybe it was just habit. "Looks like a previous owner wrote his name on the flyleaf," Tom said, peering at it. "Joshua Hartnell, Oxford, 1909. "Well, thank you, Joshua Hartnell," said Kate. "Now read, please. Oh, I hope it's a good book." "I doubt it," said Woozy. "You wouldn't have left it otherwise." "Not everyone is as miserly as you, Cockney," said Tom mildly. Woozy hated to be called Cockney, but we did it anyway. Woozy fancied himself a gentleman, but he was far beneath Kate, if you ask me. He was married already, for one thing. His wife had taken one look at Halifax Harbour and boarded the next ship back to Liverpool, taking their baby son with her. Woozy'd never seen his boy since. A funny trade to make for the hope of gold, but then Woozy was a funny sort. Chapter 1, read Tom. The Lake of Mystery. In one of the loneliest and most inaccessible parts of the Rocky Mountains of America is situated a strange lake or tarn. A few paragraphs later, we met the hero of the tale. Josiah Flint-a-Betty Floniton, Esquire, or as he was more familiarly known amongst his fellows, Flin-Flon, was a gentleman conspicuous for two things, the smallness of his stature and the largeness of his perception. Tom finished chapter 1 that night before we went to sleep, just as Flin-Flon was preparing to construct a submersible vessel for the purposes of exploring the strange lake, which seemed to be bottomless. If I perish, I shall perish nobly, Flin-Flon declared, and we all liked him. He was one of us. That night, Woozy woke up screaming. He'll be fine come morning, Kate said, after we made him a cup of tea and he'd fallen back into a fitful sleep. He often has bad dreams. He was over in South Africa with the 18th Hussars. Tom and I looked at each other just for a split second in the candlelight. Men glanced at each other, or glanced away from each other in just that way whenever war was mentioned in those years. It was a look that meant, I have my reasons and I'm not saying anything about yours. It was October 1914, and the first contingent of Canadians had just landed in Europe. The war seemed very far away, and we told each other it would all be over by Christmas. Hardly worth the bother of signing up and shipping over. Still, men looked at each other and then quickly looked away. We tucked the note into my moldy copy of The Wolves of New York, which we'd all read, and left it on the table. Tom put The Sunless City into his pack and we were off. How sure are you of these reports of gold, Tom? I asked quietly as we made ready to push the canoes into the Churchill River. He shrugged. As sure as I ever am. Sometimes it pans out and sometimes it doesn't. Only one way to know. Tell you what though, I'm not excited about gold anymore. The real money's in copper with this war on. Well, that's as may be, but we've got ourselves a gold tip and no copper tip. Maybe it's hindsight telling me he gave me a little secret smile at that. Maybe not. It was a few months later that he registered his claim to the copper ore body at the place he would call Flin-Flon. It was warmer that day and we made good time. We sang as we went, our voices ringing across the empty water, out into the bush. Kate and Tom sang Bicycle Built for Two, alternating the verses across the water between the two canoes. They had sweet voices and old Woozy and I were happy to listen and paddle in time. We made camp that night on the slope of a gray bedrock that rose gently up out of the water like a beach of stone. I lit a fire in a little hollow in the rock, and we all crawled into our bags around it and smoked, while Tom read chapters 2 and 3. Then I couldn't sleep, and neither could Kate. I stared up at the stars. She was obsessed with the Aurora Borealis, and she watched a green show for a time through the opera glasses she took with her everywhere. Woozy muttered and Tom snored. Eventually Kate fell asleep too, and I was left there alone with the stars. Got up and walked up the slope toward the dark hump of trees to relieve myself, and that's when I saw him. He was leaning against a tree. I knew he was a ghost right away, because there was a great gaping hole in his ribs, with blood dripping down to the ground, and it didn't seem to be bothering him at all. He was lit up well enough in the moonlight and the starlight. I ran back to the others and sat with my back to the fire and my face toward the tree line. I held my water all night until the gray dawn came, and then when it did, I walked over to piss into the water. I didn't want to go near the trees. So I'll stop there. That is called Traveler Take Me, and it is in the most recent issue of On Spec, which is out just now. And all of the characters in it are real historical figures, including Kate Rice, and there's a wonderful book about her, which is available on Amazon if you are interested. Thanks very much.
From the sky